The summer heat in London was unbearable that Tuesday afternoon. Tourists crowded around Buckingham Palace, their cameras clicking constantly as they tried to capture the perfect shot of the famous royal guards. Among them stood Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old software engineer from Ohio, visiting England for the first time with his girlfriend Sarah. Marcus had always been fascinated by British traditions, especially the stoic royal guards who stood motionless for hours in their distinctive red uniforms and tall black hats. He watched in amazement as guard James Mitchell maintained his position despite the sweltering heat, sweat barely visible beneath his ceremonial bearskin hat. The crowd grew thicker as the afternoon progressed. Children ran around their parents' legs while tour guides explained the history and significance of the guards to eager listeners. Sarah tugged at Marcus's sleeve, suggesting they move on to see Big Ben, but Marcus remained captivated by the discipline and dedication of these silent sentinels. James Mitchell had been serving as a royal guard for 3 years. Born and raised in Manchester, he came from a military family where service to the crown was considered an honor. His father had served in the Royal Navy, and his grandfather had been a guard at Windsor Castle. The tradition of protecting the monarchy ran deep in his blood. As Marcus observed the guard more closely, he noticed something troubling. The man's face was flushed red, and tiny beads of sweat were forming on his forehead despite his training to remain composed. The temperature had reached 35 degrees Celsius, unusual for London, and the heavy wool uniform was clearly taking its toll. Other tourists seemed oblivious to the guard's discomfort, too busy posing for selfies and chattering about their vacation plans. But Marcus, being naturally empathetic, couldn't ignore what he was seeing. He remembered reading about guards fainting from heat exhaustion during particularly hot days, though such incidents were rarely publicized. Sarah noticed her boyfriend's concern and followed his gaze to the guard. She too could see the signs of heat stress becoming more apparent. The guard's breathing seemed slightly labored, though he maintained his rigid posture and forward stare as protocol demanded. The situation was becoming critical, yet the crowd continued to press closer, creating an even warmer environment around the guard. Marcus felt compelled to act, though he wasn't sure what he could do without breaking royal protocol or causing a scene that might embarrass the guard. In that moment of decision, Marcus remembered the bottle of cold water he had just purchased from a nearby vendor. The condensation on the plastic bottle indicated it was still refreshingly cool. An idea formed in his mind, though he knew it was unconventional and potentially risky. Without fully thinking through the consequences, Marcus approached the guard slowly, his heart racing with nervousness and determination. The crowd around him seemed to sense something was about to happen, and conversations gradually died down as all eyes turned toward the American tourist and the steadfast royal guard. Marcus stepped forward with his water bottle, his hands trembling slightly from nerves. The crowd behind him whispered among themselves, wondering what the American tourist was planning to do. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something unusual was about to unfold. James Mitchell could see the approaching tourist in his peripheral vision, but maintained his trained focus straight ahead. He had dealt with countless tourists who tried to make him break character by telling jokes, making faces, or even attempting to touch his uniform. This felt different somehow, though he couldn't turn his head to assess the situation properly. As Marcus got closer, he could see the guard's condition was worse than he had initially thought. The man's lips were slightly parted as he tried to breathe more easily, and his face had taken on an alarming shade of red. Marcus knew from his first aid training that these were clear signs of heat exhaustion, potentially leading to heat stroke if left untreated. Without warning, Marcus gently splashed a small amount of cool water on the guard's face and neck. The crowd gasped audibly, and several people began recording what they assumed would be a confrontation between the tourist and palace security. They expected the guard to break protocol, or for police officers to immediately arrest the American for interfering with a royal guard. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. James Mitchell felt the cool water hit his overheated skin, and for the first time in his 3 years of service, he felt genuine relief while on duty. The water wasn't just refreshing, it was potentially life-saving. His training told him to maintain position, but his human instincts recognized the kindness in the gesture. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the inevitable reaction. Palace security guards stationed nearby began moving closer, preparing to intervene. Sarah covered her mouth in shock, certain that her boyfriend had just committed some sort of international incident that would land them both in serious trouble. But James Mitchell, despite his rigid training and sworn duty to remain motionless, did something that surprised everyone present. Instead of ignoring the tourist or showing displeasure, he gave Marcus the slightest nod of acknowledgement. It was barely perceptible, lasting only a fraction of a second, but it was unmistakably a gesture of gratitude. The moment was captured by several tourists with their cameras, though none of them fully understood the significance of what they had just witnessed. To them, it looked like a simple interaction between a tourist and a guard. But those paying close attention noticed the subtle change in the guard's demeanor. Marcus stepped back, unsure if he had done the right thing. He hadn't intended to cause any trouble or put the guard in a difficult position. His only thought had been to help someone who appeared to be in distress, regardless of their official role or the formal setting. The palace security guards reached the area, their faces stern and professional. The crowd began to disperse slightly, expecting to witness an arrest or at least a severe reprimand. Marcus prepared himself for the consequences of his impulsive act of kindness, hoping that his good intentions would be understood even if his methods were questioned. James Mitchell continued to stand at attention, but internally he was processing what had just occurred. In all his training, no one had prepared him for a moment when a stranger's compassion would mean more than following protocol to the letter. The cool water had not only provided physical relief but had reminded him of the basic human connection that existed beyond uniforms and ceremonies. Sergeant Williams, the senior palace security officer on duty, approached the scene with measured steps. He had witnessed the entire interaction and found himself in an unusual position. Protocol clearly stated that tourists should not interfere with the guards under any circumstances. Yet the Americans' actions appeared to be motivated by genuine concern, rather than mischief. The crowd watched nervously as Sergeant Williams reached Marcus and Sarah. His weathered face showed years of experience dealing with all sorts of situations involving tourists and the royal guards. He had seen people try to make guards laugh, touch their uniforms, and even attempt to steal their hats. But he had never seen someone try to help a guard who was obviously struggling with the heat. Instead of immediately detaining Marcus, Sergeant Williams asked quietly, "Sir, may I ask why you approached the guard?" His tone was professional but not hostile, which surprised both Marcus and the onlookers who were recording the encounter. Marcus swallowed nervously before responding. "I could see he was overheating badly. I work in tech, but I have first aid training and I was worried he might collapse. I just wanted to help cool him down a bit." His voice carried genuine sincerity, and Sarah squeezed his arm supportively. Sergeant Williams studied the young American for a moment, then glanced at James Mitchell, who was still maintaining his position, but looked noticeably more comfortable than he had minutes earlier. The security officer had to make a judgment call that would either escalate the situation or acknowledge that sometimes human compassion transcended rigid protocols. The crowd began to murmur among themselves, with some tourists expressing admiration for Marcus's kindness, while others debated whether he had violated some sacred British tradition. A few elderly British visitors nodded approvingly, recognizing the genuine care in the young man's actions. Meanwhile, other royal guards stationed nearby had witnessed the entire event. Though they couldn't move from their positions, they had observed their colleagues' obvious distress and the tourists' intervention. Among them was Guard David Chen, who had once nearly fainted during a particularly hot ceremony and understood exactly what James Mitchell was experiencing. Sergeant Williams made his decision. Instead of arresting or reprimanding Marcus, he simply said, "Your concern for the guard's well-being is noted and appreciated. However, for future reference, if you notice a guard in distress, please alert palace security rather than approaching directly." His words carried no malice, only professional guidance. The crowd seemed collectively relieved that the situation wasn't escalating into an international incident. Several tourists actually began applauding Marcus's compassionate gesture, though Sergeant Williams quickly gestured for them to lower their voices out of respect. For the formal setting, Sarah felt a wave of pride wash over her as she realized her boyfriend's quick thinking and empathy had potentially prevented a medical emergency. She had always admired his caring nature, but seeing him act decisively to help a stranger in a foreign country made her appreciate him even more. James Mitchell, still at his post, was experiencing a mix of emotions. His training told him that maintaining protocol was paramount, yet his human side was deeply grateful for the stranger's intervention. The cool water had provided immediate relief, and his body temperature was gradually returning to a manageable level. As the immediate tension dissipated, something remarkable began to happen. Other tourists started offering water bottles to the security officers, asking if they could help ensure the guard stayed hydrated. The simple act of one person's compassion had sparked a chain reaction of consideration and care among the entire crowd. Sergeant Williams noticed this shift in the crowd's behavior and realized that Marcus's actions had accomplished something that years of posted signs and verbal warnings had failed to achieve. The tourists were now actively thinking about the guards as real people with real needs, rather than just ceremonial fixtures to photograph. News of the incident spread quickly through social media as tourists uploaded their videos and photos. The footage showed Marcus approaching the guard with water, the moment of the splash and the guard's subtle nod of acknowledgement. Within hours, the story was trending on various platforms with hashtags like Human Kindness and Royal Guard Hero. Back at his home in Manchester, James Mitchell's father, retired Royal Navy officer Robert Mitchell, received a phone call from his daughter-in-law. She had seen the viral video and immediately recognized James, even though his face was partially obscured by his ceremonial hat. Robert felt a mixture of pride and concern as he watched his son in the footage. The story caught the attention of British media outlets, with reporters trying to track down both the American tourist and the Royal Guard involved. Palace officials found themselves in the unusual position of having to address a positive story about tourist interaction with their guards, rather than the typical negative incidents they usually dealt with. Dr. Sarah Peterson, a medical expert specializing in heat-related illnesses, was interviewed by BBC News about the incident. She explained to viewers how dangerous heat exhaustion could be, especially for someone wearing heavy woolen uniforms in direct sunlight. Her professional opinion was that the tourist's intervention may have prevented a serious medical emergency. Marcus and Sarah, meanwhile, had continued their London vacation, unaware that their moment of kindness was becoming an international sensation. They visited the Tower of London and Westminster Abbey, completely oblivious to the fact that news crews were trying to locate them for interviews about the palace incident. At Buckingham Palace, Colonel Hayes, the commanding officer responsible for the Royal Guards, called a meeting with his senior staff. The viral video had reached his desk, and he needed to address both the protocol breach and the underlying issue of guard welfare during extreme weather conditions. James Mitchell was called into the colonel's office the following morning. He had spent a sleepless night wondering if his subtle acknowledgement of the tourists' help would result in disciplinary action. His 3 years of exemplary service could be jeopardized by that single moment of human response. Colonel Hayes, a career military officer with 30 years of service, looked at the young guard with both sternness and understanding. He had served in various capacities and understood the challenges of maintaining rigid protocols while dealing with real-world situations that didn't always fit neatly into rulebooks. The conversation between the colonel and James. Mitchell was frank and thorough. The colonel acknowledged that the guard had maintained his position admirably, despite obvious physical distress. But he also needed to address the brief break in protocol when James had nodded to the tourist. However, rather than focusing solely on discipline, Colonel Hayes found himself considering the broader implications of the incident. The positive public response to the story had highlighted something important about public perception of the Royal Guards and their humanity beneath the ceremonial exterior. Media requests for official palace statements were flooding in from around the world. The story had resonated with people globally because it demonstrated simple human kindness, transcending cultural and protocol barriers. Palace communications staff were working to craft responses that acknowledged the incident without setting precedents for future tourist interactions. In Ohio, Marcus's family and friends were calling him after seeing the viral video. His mother, tears in her eyes, told reporters who had tracked her down that she wasn't surprised by her son's actions because he had always been the type of person to help others without thinking about himself. The incident was also sparking discussions in military academies and protocol training programs about the balance between maintaining discipline and responding to genuine emergency situations. Instructors were using the video as a case study in situational awareness and decision-making under pressure. James Mitchell's fellow guards had begun treating him with a new level of respect. Not because he had broken protocol, but because he had handled an unprecedented situation with grace while maintaining his primary duty. They understood that any of them could have been in his position on such an extremely hot day. 3 days after the incident, Marcus and Sarah were enjoying afternoon tea at a quaint cafe in Covent Garden when a well-dressed gentleman approached their table. He introduced himself as Charles Whitmore, a representative from Buckingham Palace's Public Relations Department, and asked if he could speak with them privately about recent events. Marcus nearly choked on his scone when he realized that his moment of kindness had somehow reached official palace attention. Sarah gripped his hand under the table as Mr. Whitmore explained that they had been identified through security footage and witness statements, and that the palace would like to invite them for a private meeting. The following morning, Marcus and Sarah found themselves walking through the private entrance of Buckingham Palace, escorted by Mr. Whitmore through corridors lined with priceless artwork and historical artifacts. Neither of them had ever imagined they would see the palace from this perspective, much less be there as honored guests rather than tourists. They were led into an elegant sitting room, where Colonel Hayes waited alongside James Mitchell, who was dressed in civilian clothes rather than his ceremonial uniform. For the first time, Marcus could see the young man's face clearly and was struck by how ordinary and approachable he appeared without the formal military bearing. The meeting began awkwardly, with both Marcus and James uncertain about how to interact, given the unusual circumstances of their first encounter. Colonel Hayes served as a diplomatic intermediary, explaining that the palace wanted to acknowledge the positive attention the incident had brought to the humanity and dedication of the royal guards. James Mitchell finally spoke directly to Marcus, his Manchester accent noticeable now that he wasn't maintaining his ceremonial silence. He thanked the American for his quick thinking and explained how the cool water had provided crucial relief during what had been one of the most challenging duty periods of his career. Marcus was amazed to learn that James was only 2 years younger than himself and had originally studied engineering before joining the military. They discovered shared interests in technology and sports, finding common ground despite their vastly different backgrounds and the formal circumstances of their first meeting. Sarah documented the meeting, with photos that the palace communications team had pre-approved, creating a historic record of an unprecedented interaction between tourists and palace officials. The images would later be used in palace publications to highlight the human side of royal traditions. Colonel Hayes revealed that the incident had prompted internal discussions about guard welfare protocols during extreme weather conditions. New procedures were being developed to provide better support for guards during particularly challenging environmental conditions. Directly inspired by Marcus's intervention, the conversation shifted to the broader impact of the viral video, which had generated overwhelmingly positive responses from around the world. People were sharing their own stories of kindness between strangers, and tourism to London had actually increased, as visitors hoped to witness similar moments of human connection. James Mitchell shared that he had received hundreds of supportive messages through the palace's official channels, including letters from military families worldwide who appreciated seeing their loved ones' service acknowledged with compassion rather than just ceremony. Marcus admitted that he had acted purely on instinct and never intended to create such a significant response. He expressed concern about whether his actions had caused any problems for James or the palace, demonstrating the same thoughtfulness that had motivated his original intervention. The palace representatives assured him that while protocols existed for important reasons, exceptional circumstances sometimes called for exceptional responses. They emphasized that his actions had highlighted the importance of viewing guards as dedicated individuals, rather than just ceremonial objects. As the meeting concluded, James Mitchell presented Marcus with a signed photograph of himself in full ceremonial dress, along with a personal note thanking him for his kindness. It was an unprecedented gesture that would become a treasured reminder of their unique encounter. Colonel Hayes announced that the palace planned to present both Marcus and James with special commendations recognizing their respective roles in demonstrating the values of compassion and duty. that the monarchy sought to embody in its service to the public. The commendation ceremony took place 2 weeks later in a private palace courtyard, attended by senior palace officials, Marcus and Sarah, James Mitchell's family, and select members of the Royal Guard Regiment. The intimate gathering was a far cry from the bustling tourist crowd where the original incident had occurred. Marcus's parents had flown in from Ohio for the occasion, still amazed that their son's spontaneous act of kindness had led to such recognition. His mother wore her best dress and carried a small American flag, while his father, a retired firefighter, understood better than most the importance of helping others without hesitation. James Mitchell's family occupied seats nearby, with his father Robert in his dress navy uniform and his mother Margaret clutching a handkerchief, clearly emotional about seeing her son honored for his service and professionalism during the challenging incident. Colonel Hayes delivered a speech that emphasized how the incident had reminded everyone that beneath the pageantry and protocol, the Royal Guards were dedicated individuals deserving of respect and consideration. He credited both Marcus's compassion and James's grace under pressure for creating a positive moment that had resonated worldwide. The ceremony included the presentation of a specially designed medal to Marcus, recognizing him as an honorary friend of the royal household for his demonstration of international goodwill and humanitarian instincts. No such medal had ever been created before. Making him the first recipient of this unique honor, James Mitchell received a commendation for exemplary service under extreme conditions and for maintaining the dignity of his position while acknowledging appropriate civilian assistance. His commanding officers noted that his response had set a positive example for future guards facing similar situations. Media coverage of the ceremony was carefully managed, with selected photographers capturing the historic moment while respecting the private nature of the gathering. The images would later appear in newspapers worldwide, continuing the positive story that had begun with a simple splash of water. During the reception following the ceremony, Marcus and James had the opportunity to speak more extensively about their backgrounds and experiences. James revealed that the incident had given him a new perspective on his role, helping him understand that being a Royal Guard meant connecting with people, not just standing motionless. Sarah documented every moment of the ceremony, creating a comprehensive record of their unexpected London adventure. She had already begun planning to write a book about the experience, believing that the story demonstrated how small acts of kindness could create ripple effects far beyond anyone's imagination. The palace announced that new protocols would be implemented to better protect guards during extreme weather conditions, including more frequent rotation schedules and discreet hydration support. These changes would directly benefit all future guards, making Marcus's intervention a catalyst for meaningful policy improvements. Representatives from tourism boards in both Britain and Ohio were present at the ceremony, recognizing how the positive story had enhanced cultural relations between the two countries. Plans were already being discussed for educational exchange programs inspired by the cross-cultural friendship that had developed. James Mitchell's fellow guards attended the ceremony in their dress uniforms, showing support for their colleague and appreciation for the recognition of their shared service. Many of them had experienced similar challenges during hot weather and understood the significance of having their welfare acknowledged. Officially, the ceremony concluded with a private tour of palace, rooms not typically accessible to the public, including the guard quarters where James and his colleagues prepared for their daily duties. Marcus gained a new appreciation for the dedication and preparation required for what many tourists saw as simply standing still. As the day ended, both families exchanged contact information, with plans for the Mitchells to visit Ohio and the Thompsons to return to Manchester during their next British visit. The friendship that had begun with a splash of water had evolved into lasting international connections between two families from different continents. 1 year later, Marcus returned to London with Sarah, now his fiancée, to visit the palace and meet with James Mitchell, who had been promoted to corporal following his exemplary service record. The viral video from their first encounter had accumulated millions of views and inspired countless stories of strangers helping strangers around the world. James greeted them in civilian clothes at the same cafe where they had first met the palace representative. He looked relaxed and confident, having grown comfortable with the attention their story had brought to the important work of the Royal Guards. Their friendship had deepened through regular video calls and message exchanges throughout the year. The three friends walked through London together, with James serving as their personal guide to hidden corners of the city that most tourists never discovered. He shared stories about his fellow guards and the positive changes that had been implemented since their famous encounter, including improved heat management protocols and better public engagement training. They visited the exact spot outside Buckingham Palace where the original incident had occurred. A small plaque had been installed nearby, not commemorating their specific interaction, but honoring all acts of kindness between visitors and palace staff throughout history. Tour guides now regularly mentioned the importance of treating guards with respect and consideration. Marcus had used his newfound platform to launch a foundation promoting random acts of kindness, with initial funding coming from speaking engagements about his London experience. The foundation had already sponsored numerous programs bringing together people from different cultures through shared humanitarian projects. Sarah's book about their experience had become a bestseller, with proceeds supporting military family welfare programs in both the United States and Britain. She had discovered a talent for writing that she never knew she possessed. Inspired by the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them to London, James Mitchell had been selected to participate in a cultural exchange program, spending a month in the United States learning about American military traditions and sharing British ceremonial practices. His visit to Ohio had been warmly received, with local schools inviting him to speak about service, duty, and international friendship. The palace had received thousands of letters from visitors sharing their own positive interactions with royal guards, inspired by the original video to approach the guards with respect and appreciation rather than attempts to make them break character. The culture around guard interactions had genuinely shifted toward mutual respect. During their anniversary visit, they were invited to a private dinner with several other royal guards and their families. The evening was filled with laughter and stories, proving that the formal exterior of the guards concealed warm, funny, and deeply human individuals who took pride in their unique role. Marcus and Sarah announced their engagement during the dinner, with James serving as one of the first to congratulate them. They revealed plans for a destination wedding in London, with James participating as a groomsman, creating another first in the ongoing friendship between the American tourist and the British Guard. The story had inspired documentary filmmakers, who were creating a feature-length film about kindness transcending cultural boundaries. Both Marcus and James had agreed to participate, hoping their experience would encourage others to act compassionately, regardless of circumstances or social barriers. As they stood once again outside Buckingham Palace, watching the current guards maintain their disciplined posts, Marcus reflected on how a single moment of human concern had created ripple effects none of them could have anticipated. The guards on duty that day included several who had been inspired to join the service after seeing the positive portrayal of guard life in the media coverage. Their story had become part of London tourist lore, with guides regularly sharing the tale of the American who helped a British guard and sparked an international friendship. The incident demonstrated that in an increasingly divided world, simple human kindness remained a universal language that could bridge any divide. The three friends parted that evening with plans for James to visit them in Ohio for the wedding, continuing a friendship that had begun with splashed water and evolved into something that would last their lifetimes. Their story proved that sometimes the most extraordinary relationships begin with the most ordinary acts of human decency.